Okay, these notes are solving multi-step equations. Okay, so just like the previous section, the name is there for a reason. These are multi-step because they're going to take you a few steps to get them solved. Okay, and each one is going to be different depending on the original equation you were given. So in our first example, we have 8x minus 3x minus 10 equals 20. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to do is combine these like terms that are in the initial problem. Okay, so 8x minus 3x gives you a 5x. Okay, you carry down your minus 10, carry down your equals 20. Okay, now this is actually back to a two-step equation, just like the previous section. So 5x minus 10 equals 20. You need to first get rid of this minus 10. Okay, we want to do that by performing the opposite operation. So we're now going to add 10 to both sides. Carry down your 5x. 20 plus 10 is 30. Now your final step is to, again, we're trying to isolate this value of x. So right now it's 5 times x, so I need to do the opposite and divide both sides by 5. 5 divided by 5 gives me a 1x, or just an x. 30 divided by 5 is 6. Right? So now you need to check that solution. Right? And again, a solution is a value that makes an equation a true statement. That's why we're checking these, because if my answer, my solution is correct, it should give me a true statement when I plug it back in. So I put it back into my original equation, okay, which was 8x minus 3x minus 10 equals 20. So everywhere I had an x, I'm going to replace it with my solution of a 6. Okay, so both of these used to be an x, they are now a 6. Again, I wrap that in parentheses when I'm plugging that value back in. 8 times 6 is 48. 3 times 6 is 18. Carry down your minus 10 and your equals 20. 48 minus 18 is 30. Again, I do this addition and subtraction left to right. That's just my order of operations. So 48 minus 18 is 30. Bring down your minus 10. And then 30 minus 10 is 20. So that means that my value of 6 gave me a true statement, which means that 6 is the solution to this equation. All right, so next couple examples. 9d plus 4 minus 2d equals 32. So same rule applies. I have like terms here that need to be combined together. So 9 minus 2 is a 7, so that gives me 7d. Carry down your plus 4 equals 32. Now again, we're right back to a two-step equation. So the very first step of this is the only thing that's new here. Okay, and it's not really even completely new because you already had combining like terms as well. Okay, so now I have a two-step equation. I'm going to subtract this 4 to the other side first. That gives me 7d equals 28. And then my final step is to divide by that 7 to undo that operation. So d equals 4. That is my solution. I need to check it by plugging it back into the original equation to make sure that I get a true statement. When I plug it in and follow order of operations, I do end up that 32 equals 32, which is a true statement, which means that my solution was correct. Okay, same thing in the next example. So I have 23 equals a negative 4m plus 2 plus m. Now remember, even though there wasn't a value, a coefficient in front of that m, it's really a 1. So if it helps you to write it in there in front of it, then do that. Okay, so I'm going to combine like terms again. So negative 4m plus a 1m is a negative 3m. Everything else from my original equation gets dropped down to the next line. Now I'm back to a two-step equation again. So I have a positive 2. I'm going to subtract it to the other side. I bring down my negative 3m. 23 minus 2 is 21. Now my final step here is to divide by a negative 3. That leaves me with my value of a 1m, which is what I wanted. And 21 divided by negative 3 is a negative 7. Okay, again, check your answer. Make sure that your solution is correct. plug it back in everywhere there was an m in your initial equation. So every place that I originally had an m, I'm going to replace it with a -7. Go through with order of operations. So -4 times -7 is a 28, plus 2 minus 7. Left to right, 28 plus 2 is 30. Subtract 7, you do get 23 equals 23. So you now know that your solution was correct. Okay, now the next two examples, we're going to have some parentheses. Okay, anytime you have parentheses in an equation, you're going to have to distribute. Okay, so 7x plus 2 times the quantity of x plus 6 equals 39. Now in this case, I have a whole number that is outside of the parentheses. So I'm going to start by distributing that whole number in. So I carried on my 7x, be sure to not lose that. I distribute my 2 in, which gives me 2x. 2 times 6 gives me a plus 12, equals 39. So be sure to carry everything down that you didn't actually deal with. Now I'm right back to my previous examples. Now I have like terms that I need to combine. So 7x plus 2x is a 9x. Bring down my plus 12, bring down my equals 39. Now I'm right back to a two-step equation. So I had originally had a plus 12 in my equation, so I'm going to subtract 12 to get rid of it. So I now have a 9x equals 27. My final step here is to divide both sides by this 9. 27 divided by 9 gives me a 3. Now I need to check my answer. So again, I take my original equation, and everywhere I had an x, I'm going to replace it with a value of 3. So I have 7 times 3 plus 2 times the quantity of 3 plus 6 equals 39. Follow order of operations. So inside of these parentheses has to come first. 3 plus 6 is a 9. Carry down your 2. You can also multiply your 7 times 3 and get a 21. Okay, now this multiplication needs to happen first. Remember the order of operations, multiplication comes before this addition. So 2 times 9 gives me 18. Then I can add my 21, which gives me 39. Okay, that is a true statement. So I now know that my answer of 3 was the correct solution. Again, another example with a whole number outside of the parentheses. So I have 6x minus 2 times the quantity of x minus 5 equals 46. So I again need to start by distributing. So I'm going to carry down my 6x. Now be very careful. This is a -2. So remember that the sign in front of a value gets carried along with it. So -2 times x is a -2x. Now a -2 times a -5 is a positive 10. Okay, negative times a negative is a positive, so be very careful. Then you still have an equals 46. Now I'm going to combine like terms. So 6x minus 2x becomes a 4x. Bring down your plus 10 and bring down your equals 46. Now I'm back to that two-step equation. So I can now subtract my 10 to get rid of it and move it to the other side. I have a 4x equals now a 36. Final step then, you want to divide both sides by this 4 that is still attached to the x. 36 divided by 4 gives you a 9 for your final answer. Again, check your solution. Make sure that you got it right. Plug it back in. Everywhere you originally had an x, you're going to replace it with a 9. Follow order of operations, and you will get that 46 equals 46, which means your answer was correct, and it is an actual solution. Now, this next example is slightly different. Okay, we still have parentheses. However, my value outside of the parentheses, so what I would normally distribute in, is a fraction. Okay, now you could distribute this in and solve it how you did in the previous examples. You're going to be dealing with fractions then, okay, because this doesn't distribute in nicely and give you whole numbers. You're going to be left with fractions. If you choose to go that route, that's fine. I would be very careful, and I would be sure to use your calculator and wrap that fraction in parentheses when using your calculator. Now, your other option, which I would suggest, is actually taking this fraction, right, and multiplying both sides by the reciprocal. Okay, and we did this in the previous section of the two-step equations. Okay, so the reciprocal of 3/2, remember that just means to flip the fraction. So the reciprocal of 3/2 is 2/3. You want to then multiply both sides of this equation by that reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply my left side by 2/3 and my right side by 2/3. Now here, 2/3 times 3/2, they're going to cancel each other out. You end up with 6/6, which is 1. Okay, so they cancel each other out. They just become a value of 1, which was your ultimate goal. You wanted to get rid of that fraction. So now I'm left with 3x plus 5 on that side because this whole piece became a 1. So you carried on your 3x plus 5. Now 2/3 times a negative 24. Off to the side here is the work for that. So 2/3 times negative 24, I'm going to put over 1 to make it a fraction. Now remember, when multiplying fractions, all you need to do is simply multiply straight across. So 2 times negative 24 is a negative 48, and 3 times 1 is 3. You can divide those then to make that into a whole number. Negative 48 divided by 3 is actually just a negative 16. So 2/3 times negative 24 is a negative 16. Okay, again, you can use your calculator to do that operation. Be very careful. Make sure that when you type it in the calculator, as always, your fraction needs to get wrapped in parentheses. Okay, so even though it's not written in parentheses, if you're going to use your calculator, you need to wrap that fraction of 2/3 in its own set of parentheses. So now I have 3x plus 5 equals negative 16. I am back to my two-step equation like always. So I have a positive 5. I'm going to subtract that 5 to both sides, bring down my 3x equals negative 16 minus 5 gives me a negative 21. Final step, divide both sides by this 3. Negative 21 divided by 3 is a negative 7. Okay, again, check your solution. So I'm going to rewrite my original problem. So 3/2. And then in parentheses, 3, but instead of x, I am plugging in a negative 7. Okay, again, when I plug that number in, I'm going to put it in its own set of parentheses. Then plus 5 equals negative 24. So order of operations tells me to do what's inside of all this parentheses first. So 3 times negative 7 is a negative 21, plus 5 is a negative 16. Now I can multiply 3/2 times a negative 16. Again, you can use your calculator for this if you'd like to. Make sure that you wrap this 3/2 in its own set of parentheses. When you do that, you do get negative 24 equals negative 24, so that checks out. Okay, 2 more examples. Okay, and they are along the same lines as that one. My fraction out front of the parentheses means that I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. So for this problem, I'm going to multiply by 5/2 because I flipped 2/5. So I multiply the left and the right side by 5/2. That simply cancels out those fractions. I'm left with 3r plus 4 equals 5/2 times 10. The work is off to the side. You end up with 25. Now I'm going to subtract my 4, bring down my 3r equals 21. Divide by 3, r equals 7. Okay, then the final one, same as before. I need to multiply by the reciprocal of this fraction. So the reciprocal of negative 4/5 is a negative 5/4. Okay, the sign does not change with reciprocal, you just flip it, so the negative stays. Multiply by that on both sides. On my left side, all those fractions cancel out. I'm left with 4a minus 1. On my right side, negative 5/4 times 28. Here's all the work for it. You end up with negative 35. Okay, again, you can type it in your calculator, but make sure this negative 5/4 is in its own set of parentheses. Now I'm back to my two-step equation. Add 1 to both sides. So 4a equals negative 34. Divide both sides by 4. I end up with a negative 34/4, which can be reduced to a negative 17/2. Always reduce your fractions when possible. Okay, you can use your calculator for that. All right, again, this was solving multi-step equations. This is your concept number 6.